of this session. So for instance, Prof. Langa Khumalo will be talking about language resources as enablers. Prof. Mishra, his talk is titled From Campfire to ChatGPT, Rethinking Education in the Ever-Shifting Knowledge Landscape, and he presented a keynote today, and seeing his talk is almost linked to what he was presenting today. And lastly, Ms. Sukaina Walji, it's titled Teaching and Learning in Emerging Ecosystems, Re-Emerging Universities in the Future. So each presenter is allocated time. They will present all of them. Please jot down all your questions, comments, and then we'll open probably 1 or 2 rounds of questions or engagements later. Over to you, Prof. Khumalo.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, colleagues. I want to start with the language policy for higher education institutions, which was enunciated in 2020 and took effect from the 1st of January of 2022. And the policy requires that, among other things, universities teach in the languages that our students can easily access, following the Constitution, which recognizes the 12 official languages. And this means that these languages need to be treated institutionally with the parity of esteem that the Constitution requires. But the reality is that 30 years on, South Africa still functions with only one language, that is English. Which is why I'm speaking in English to you. I could easily be speaking in any of the 12 official languages, and which is why this conference did not have translation services for any of the other 12. Again, not a slight or a dig to the organizers, but again, because we function monolingually, essentially functioning monolingually, when the Constitution of the country says we must function in the languages that we are most comfortable in, and these languages are protected in the Constitution. The language policy for higher education, for public higher education institutions, also requires that not just recognize these languages, but teach in these languages. And we saw an excellent paper from the last of our former presenters who are teaching STEM subjects using translanguaging as a method of epistemic access. Again, because we are functioning essentially monolingually, but maybe with some institutions bilingual, with Afrikaans still being the language of teaching and learning in some of our universities, we are essentially functioning in the main on those 2 languages. The main import of that policy is to address what has been characterized as the bane of higher education, which is the very high attrition rate, and also improve what has been characterized in the literature as epistemic access, which means there is an acknowledgement that our students are not grappling with and quite fully understanding the knowledge system that we present to them, which means we are implicitly setting up our very valuable core business clients up for failure. And here is the problem. Even if you want to acknowledge and accept the fact that you need to use any other language other than English and Afrikaans today, the same languages do not have the capacity to function at this level, let alone at basic level, basic education level, which means we have a crisis of resources. we need to resource these languages so that they can have the capacity to function at teaching and learning. So that again, the speakers of this language can interface with knowledge, can interface with any form of science seamlessly. Our problems are colonial, and I will put it starkly. And they are colonial not because the colonialists just wanted to get land and just disperse you, and that was the end of it. Because that ended. It's important. It ended. They stopped grinding your land. But it transitioned. It transitioned to another level. To the conceptual level. To the schooling system. In Africa, we had a complete citizenship training model where we acknowledge the fact that you learn until you go to your grave. That training was a lifelong activity. It's not unique to Africans. John Dewey in America attested to that. That learning is a lifelong exercise. We had that. But the colonial model brought the schooling system. That there would be a space where you are going to be trained with certain affordances that are going to pre-qualify you to a role in your society. Be it a teacher, a nurse, an engineer, etc. But the colonial model, the colonial schooling model, then had a caveat. There was a language of the schooling system. I grew up in an era in this very continent where when we got into the school, we were punished for speaking any other language other than the English language. We were punished. I had in grade 4, our teacher was so cruel that if you spoke any other language and your name was written down by a class monitor, he would bring all those names up front and all of us up front, and he would call us a boy who was left-footed called John. And then he would ask you to bend, whether you're a boy or a girl, bend over, and John will kick you. Right in front of the class. For daring to speak your mother tongue. So the proscription of African languages in the schooling system meant that the languages could not interface with any knowledge system, with any form of knowledge, which meant that the languages were what I have come to call in the literature de-intellectualized. They lacked the natural efficacy to interface with any form of science, maths, English, geography, whatever. But the opposite happened in the church system. If you want to see why the proscription. In the church, the missionaries started by learning our languages. They translated all the hymns into our African languages. And the Bible right now is the most translated text in the world. Why? They wanted you to imbibe the Bible and the missionary system. What is the English phrase? Okay, I'll leave it because I'm not. English is very low now. The battery is low. But they wanted you to be fully consumed by this new religious system that they were presenting to you. Because they understood the role of language. You must sing the praises in your language, you must sing the verses in your language. I usually ask, when I was still teaching, I used to ask my students, what language do you use when you're praying? With that, the figure, the statistics would change year in, year out. But the bulk of them would pray in English. So if I say, let's pray, Because when I started them, they looked at me for a moment, and I said, actually I mean askulege, which means let us pray in English. Because language plays a vital role in any form of understanding. And it is a process that makes us access and initiate very complex processes. I will talk more about that tomorrow. But looking back to the language policy for higher education institutions, it means that even if we wanted to introduce the teaching and learning in Isizulu and any other language in the country, we would struggle because these languages have been de-intellectualized. That means in their current form, they lack the capacity to actually interface with any form of science. Which is why you will find the students say, yeah, I could actually learn physics, but you are complicating it further if you want to present it in Isizulu. Because they don't have that mother tongue competencies in Isizulu to interface which means now we have a battle to develop language resources for these languages. The complexity gets worse when you look at the context of 4IR, which presents the infrastructure as the digital infrastructure or the cyber infrastructure. And now you have a new threat. Previously, we used to say endangered languages are languages that don't have grammars, that don't have dictionaries. Now, the seriously endangered languages are languages that don't have a footprint in the cyber infrastructure. And that accounts for most languages in the world, and almost all of the African languages. So the imperative is there to develop language resources. And the South African Center for Digital Language Resources that I work for is a science infrastructure within the context of the South African Research Infrastructure Roadmap, SARI for short, that is set up to develop resources for all the 12 official languages. Don't ask me whether we're developing any resources for English. But we are developing a lot of resources for African languages for the reason that they need to actually have functional space within the context of 4IR. And this means we have to develop a lot of data. And look at me, I've been talking for almost 10 minutes now, and I've been developing poor resources for English. And I haven't developed a single resource for ICT. They don't even have the space that we can use so that we can actually develop the resources in the language. And we need multimodal resources. So the challenge is so complex, especially if we continue to function in the manner in which we are doing. But that said, the corpora that we have for these official languages, or 12 from them, when it comes to African languages, they're so small. So small that there is very little of any system, whether it's a machine learning system, whether it's a chatbot, to learn from those type of data sets. So the huge challenge is to develop multimodal corpus resources that these systems can learn from in order to develop more clever systems in these African languages. That's why African languages are characterized as under-resourced or low-resource languages. It is because of this history that I have very glibly iterated. We need to do more. But to do more is to follow certain principles that will make this data findable, that will make this data reusable, that will make this data interoperable, so that again, developing these machine learning systems can actually be a possibility. We need to do a lot with the type of resources that we have so that we can actually have these languages function in this digital era within the context of 4IR more efficiently, and so that we can even say pronouncements articulated in the language policy for higher education institution. You can see the deadline. Without the resources, it is futile. And I'm talking about technology resources. When it comes to just words, the terminology, some of it is absent. You need the terminology so that a physics professor can actually teach physics in ISoTL. Thank you.
Yeah.
The next speaker is Prof. Punya Mishra.
Thank you very much. And I so appreciate the discussion on language, because I want to talk about language slightly differently. But I did want to share one story. So my mother was a writer. She's written 17 books. She used to write columns for the newspapers. She wrote everything in the native language of Odia. Of the 17 books, there's only one book that I can read. That's the one that she wrote in English. And as I reflect on that, when I think about that, this language has allowed me to be where I am today, English, to be honest. But at the same time, that long finger of colonial history comes and pokes me on the back and denies me access to something as intimate as my mother's own writing. And so I thank you so much for what you spoke, because I think that speaks to a very important issue that touches all of us in different ways. Before we start, I want to show a short video. I want you to watch it very carefully. There are no words in this video, and I'm going to ask you what you saw. Okay, so pay close attention. All right, that's it. What do you see? A little bit of chaos. There's black pie. Do you see any kind of a story there?
Yeah.
What was the story?
Two people hiding from
Some bully, something. Those are the kinds of words that people use. And there's a reason why I showed the video. This was actually a study done in the 1940s by two psychologists named Hyder and Sybil. What they found is that when they showed this video, they asked people, what do you see? Everybody used intentional language. They said, this dot was trying to escape from the big triangle, and the big triangle got angry, rushed after them and chased them, and they tried to hide, all of that stuff. Majority, in fact, if I remember the data correctly, out of like 30 plus people that they did, only one person described it as a triangle moved from the left part of the screen to the right part of the screen, and a dot went down from the, which all of you are laughing as you see that, but that's actually all you saw. All that other stuff was made up by you, right? But we find the other one funny. Why is that? And that's what I'm going to sort of talk a little bit about today. Is the power of our brain to ascribe intentionality to things and make that connection to what it means when we live in a world where there are these intentional agents out there that we will call AI, or which we call AI. And where does that word name AI even come from? Why do we use the word intelligence there, and what implications does that have? And then I sort of ended my talk this morning talking about this idea that, that whether or not you use AI in your classroom, the world around you will change because of AI. And so you will have to be thinking about it in some way or another. I want to take that to the next level and say what happens when we live in a world where these social agents are everywhere. And what kind of synthetic or parasocial relationships will be formed? What does that mean? And again, I'm not the first person to talk about this. You know, if you look at what OpenAI says, they describe these models as having reasoning capabilities, and you know, Anthropic will say something like that Claude, they tweak its character. This is word, I'm not making these words up. They use these words. And so this language that we use not only shapes how we describe things, but it also shapes our way of, it frames the conversation that we have with these objects. And these metaphors are more than just words, right? So metaphors quite literally transfer meaning from one area, one space to another. And what's interesting is that in Greek, a truck is called a metaphor, literally. Because trucks carry things from one place to the other, that's what metaphors do. So there it's literal, but now it's become a metaphor, which is kind of funny, right? And so we say things like, this is the foundation of an argument and the flow of time. An argument is not a building, time is not a river, but you know, those metaphors are ones that we have come to use, and we just take them as being transparent. And so metaphors lurk everywhere, which if you think about it, that itself is a metaphor, because metaphors don't hide, they're just words. But it seems completely transparent. So I think it's really important to understand that how metaphors and the language you use constrain how we think about things, and also open up opportunities. It's not always just one way. So if you think about how we talk about the brain, for instance, right? So when clay tablets were there, we used to talk about the mind like being a clay tablet, so we would things like memories are inscribed on it or imprinted on it. And then steam engines come in, and then we have mechanistic metaphors like, you know, his thoughts got derailed. That's a train gets derailed, now thought becomes a train. And students become cogs in the machine. Right? So, and then once we started in computers and so on, we start using things like, oh, I haven't downloaded that at all. And people, you know, would say things like, you know, my short-term memory is, I'm losing my short-term memory. That's a completely computer metaphor. Whether or not our brain works that way, we don't know. Our brain is a black box, which is again a metaphor. So everything that we use to try to understand something that we don't, we use this metaphorical language. And you know, some of you who might be thinking this is such a long day and now we're stuck listening to this guy, might be saying, I don't have the bandwidth for this, which is also a metaphor. Now, what's interesting is, now that we think of metaphor, now let's think about this term that we call artificial intelligence. Now in 1956, there was this guy, let me look up his name, McCarthy, thank you. So he wrote this proposal where he said, in this summer, we want to figure out this whole thing of human intelligence, and he had to give that proposal a title. And he poked around, looking around for different titles, and the obvious title at that time was this word called cybernetics, which had been invented by this guy called Norbert Wiener. Except this guy, McCarthy, hated Robert Wiener, because Wiener was an annoying guy who would like fight really hard for his ideas, and you know, like, you're stealing my ideas, you know, he was that silly. And so he's like, oh, we need something else. And he said, oh, I'm going to call this artificial intelligence. Now imagine if this term would have been called cybernetics. Right? Suddenly all these ascriptions that we are making to this technology would be very different, because intelligence is this innate human capacity. Cybernetics by definition is a machine-like capacity. So we would be using this language as a metaphor like we did the steam engine or the computer or short-term memory. But now we have flipped the equation. For the first time, because we lack the right language to talk about these technologies, we have started using human-like metaphors to understand the technology rather than vice versa. Do you see the flip that's happened? I find it really, really interesting, right? So, there's another layer that I want to bring into this picture. Now, if you go back to this video, that video had no words, no language. That didn't stop all of us from seeing this narrative play out. Right? A story play out, characters with intentions, with agency, with beliefs and desires, and seeking to escape, and seeking to hurt, and getting angry. I have done some research very early on with little children, with grown-ups, that we can make these kinds of ascriptions to all kinds of interfaces as well. Computer interfaces, there is recent Reeves and Nass have this amazing line of work showing that people are polite to computers. So they will reveal more about themselves when the computer tells them something about itself. So this is a really funny study. So they got the computer, they asked people to fill out a survey on the computer. In one case, it just said, please fill out a survey. In the other case, it said, this is the old study, that I'm a Pentium 485 processor with this RAM and this speed. Can you please tell me something about yourself? And people would write more when the computer reveals something about itself, because humans believe in reciprocity. If I want you to tell me a story about your life, the best way is by my first sharing a story about my life. That when I was a child, I fell down, my mom slapped me, and I'm still, and you'd be like, oh, my mother, you can't believe how bad she was, right? Right? And so we humans have this innate tendency to make these ascriptions as well. So the analogy I give to this, you know the animal, the beaver, right? So beavers have evolved to build dams where they keep their food and so on and so forth. So for them, a leakage in the dam is the worst thing that can happen, because they're going to lose their whatever they have built. But what makes a beaver build a dam or fix a dam? It's not the sight of water, it's the sound of water. Because for billions of years of evolution, the sound of water correlated 100% with actual water. What the beavers didn't realize that there were social psychologists going around with tape recorders playing the sound of water. So there will be water flowing here, the tape recorders playing here, the beavers will build that dam on the tape recorder. Okay? Now think about us. Our social brains are deeply devoted to understanding, we are social animals, to understanding intentions, behaviors, desires. If you right now put your head down and go, I'm like, oh my God, she doesn't like what I'm saying. I know that feels so hurt. Like, a colleague of yours crosses by and doesn't say good morning, you spend the rest of the day thinking like, what happened? Was it that email that I sent that I didn't CC them? You know, did I say something wrong? Because we do that, right? That's how we live in a social world. And now we're living in a world which will interact with us, a tool which will interact with us in a language, which today, I think you showed us an example today of OpenAI's new voice modality, which will interact with us by voice. So we will, and what I'm trying to say is that we will form these relationships with these technologies. And when we think about the impact that social media has had, and I talked about this morning, about on youth and on teens and so on, what does that mean for the developing mind? You know, COVID happened, okay, we got through that, but the impact of COVID still stays, whether it's learning loss and so on. Social media, now the companies that Meta is saying, oh, we're going to prevent students, kids under 13 from signing up, but the damage is done. And so this is the part about AI that I don't see many people talking about. That AI is going to be this one technology where this metaphor of the mind that we're using is going to run amok. I have the whole blog post written about how different companies, Google, Meta, Apple, Microsoft, and OpenAI are dealing with it. Google is screwed because their whole identity is based on accuracy of results. This stuff will make stuff up. Right? They are in deep trouble. Microsoft does this funny thing where they say, Copilot will help you in writing. Once in a while you'll get something wrong, but that is to help you creatively. Which is basically saying you can't control this thing. Okay? The one company among all of them who can truly tap into what AI is OpenAI, because they don't have a legacy. And if you see what OpenAI is leaning into is voice with emotion. Okay? Some of the fastest growing AI companies are Replica AI, and a whole bunch of other ones which will be romantic partners, will be friends, will be so and so. That's the world that we're entering, and I think that higher education and all of us who are interested in what it means for the future of our children need to be thinking about. I could go on and on, but I've been getting the signal for 10 minutes now saying stop. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Mishra. We'll now move to our last panelist, Yes, Sukaina, Walji,
Hi.
over to you.
Thanks very much. Wow, that was quite, both of you, quite some facts to follow. And I just wanted to start, when you were talking, something just popped into my head, so I thought I would share it around mother tongue. So I was born in East Africa, in Tanzania, and I grew up speaking Swahili and Gujarati, my home language, and I only learned English when I was 6 or 7 when my family moved to the UK. And I remember a particular time when I was struggling at school because everything was in English, and the teachers called my parents and then said, "You must just talk to her in English because she's really struggling." And my father said, "Absolutely not. It's your job to teach her English, it's my job to teach her her mother tongue." And I managed, clearly. Sadly, I've lost a lot of the Swahili, but I've kept Gujarati. And I suppose it's really around, it's just when you were talking, I'm very thankful for that, actually. But it also gets me thinking how ingrained it is that we think the norm is English. And so, I think just before I start, and it's related, is that I'm very pleased that at University of Cape Town, which is where I am, that we have passed our language policy. And it's been a hard couple of years of, as you probably know, you were at our language in Durban a few weeks ago. It kind of relates back into my topic today. I'm going to just touch a little bit on the role of teachers in the future university and the teaching function, and what we are expecting our teachers to do. So I'm director of our Teaching and Learning Centre at the Centre for Innovation, Learning and Teaching at the University of Cape Town. I'll talk a little bit more about that in my keynote tomorrow, what we do and how that frames what I am interested in researching and implementing. But effectively, we support staff in teaching and learning, in digital education, and all the kind of associated aspects of improving or supporting or capacitating our teaching staff and also the support staff around teaching, so that our students can succeed. And for those of us working in the South African sector, we're very well aware of the huge challenges that we have in the sector regarding epistemic access, about throughput, and at UCT we have a racialized achievement gap, and so on. So we have huge problems. And as we just mentioned, the last few years have been incredibly challenging for the teaching staff, for lecturers, tutors, and so on. We've navigated the, I would say, reasonably successfully the COVID moment, moving to emergency remote teaching, and even though at UCT we possibly, had to have resources that enabled us to do that in terms of digital infrastructure, it was still terrible. It was clear, the most unequal and suboptimal situation for our students when they were sent home, and that there's no getting away from that. Doesn't matter how good your digital learning infrastructure is if your students are unable to access. And so those inequalities have led to learning losses and persist now. And so I don't really think we have got over COVID, actually. And staff that cut, and we're still figuring out what do we keep, what do we maintain. And so I think reminding us of the values of why we're doing what we do, which is effectively around equitable access and making those decisions that hopefully leave students behind. But anyway, that is where what the conversations in the teaching function are across our sector. We're now moving into blended learning and new modes of delivery at UCT. Again, another 2 years, we have just ratified our new digital and online education policy, which sets out that UCT considers that all education now is digitally enabled, from in-person to blended to online, and that was just ratified 2 years ago. Again, it's been I was leading on that, and it's been 18 months of consultations around what do we mean by blended learning, what do we mean by hybrid, hyperflex, how does it conform to national regulations between contact and distance, all those sort of nitty-gritty things. But essentially we now have a stance around our approach to digital education. We also are going through a number of initiatives at UCT. We have an LMS migration going on, data analytics projects, new assessment policy. And so I suppose what I'm thinking is, gosh, what are we putting our teaching staff through, in terms of all the new things that they have to take on board. And yes, we do, I think, have reasonably good support structures and so on. But I just have conversations where people say, I cannot just take on one more thing. I can't really imagine, I have my day job as well. And this isn't new. We've always had sort of change coming through. But I also push back against this sort of narrative around the teacher moving to a facilitator and a guide on the side, and no longer the sage on the stage. I'm not saying it's not good to think about different teaching roles, but I also think it's an easy kind of cheap shot almost sometimes that teachers suddenly have to reinvent their professional identity. It takes away a sense of agency, I think, because it's really about, I think as you were saying, you've got to trust your judgment. What is it that you know your students best, you know your discipline best, you know how to teach it. Yes, you may get help and so on. So I do push back against that, those sort of slightly trite comments. And I think we should critically examine this rhetoric for the context that we are in. Sometimes our first years coming in actually do need that sage for a while, scaffolded, supported, fully wraparound support and so on until we can let them a little bit loose. But nonetheless, I think that our universities are digitally transforming. The type of conversations that we're having in this conference probably wouldn't have happened in 2019 to the same extent. And it's very exciting as well. But I think these are impacting the role of teachers. And we do expect more expanded skill sets. Most recently, the ability to understand and navigate generative AI, adaptive blended learning environments. Also, multimodality is we talk about needing to engage students with different types of assessments, for example, in terms of media. And so those are also new types of thinking capacities that we're expecting teaching staff. And I think what I try and speak about when I at UCT and how we see this in terms of support for staff and capacity is you're not developing a staff member so that they can become all of these amazing things. I think there's a conceptual distinction between the teaching function, which everybody in the university is responsible for, and teachers as professionals in their expertise. And I think that there are many factors that make up a learning ecosystem, all of which impact the teaching function. I do, at this stage, though, want to make a strong case for the existence of teachers in the university of the future. I think that we all remember that one teacher who made a difference to us. Put up your hand if there was a teacher who made a huge difference to your career trajectory, and you remember that conversation. Yeah, I do. I was, as often compliant Indian girls do, was planning to do biology and chemistry at university, and a teacher came, one of my history teacher came and said to me, I think you've got a real flair for history. I think you should study it, pure humanities. And I was like, oh, I hadn't even thought of that. That's conceptually, right? And, I did, and, it all went rather well. So I'm just saying that I think that there is a huge, I will always push for that, the human person, and maybe it's because I like humans more than machines. But good to know. So I'm not saying that, but I do think that we need to reframe that there is a learning ecosystem the agency of teaching, I think, is going to be more distributed across our institutions. So we now have, because we're moving into digital university, we have learning technologists, learning designers, the role of IT and at UCT we have ICTS, equivalent roles, multimedia, and what I think I really push for is these people are not service delivery people. They are also educators who have knowledge to bring to the teaching function. They can do research, they build knowledge, and so what I've seen the most transformative teaching changes are when teams have worked together. And so I started at UCT our MOOCs project, Massive Open Online Courses, in 2015, and at that stage this was quite new for the institution that we were creating fully online courses on these public platforms. We had partnerships with Coursera and FutureLearn, and we brought together teams of learning designers, multimedia, and some of our kind of most high-profile professors, because we wanted to kind of go big on the global stage, who had never taught online before, did not understand, the kind of pedagogy things. But we persevered and we created teams, and I think if I can see where the magic happened, it was mutual respect between all these different functions, understanding the role of learning designers, understanding blended learning of online pedagogies, capacity for innovation, but also we took off, and I'm saying we, from the learning, because I was in the learning design function at that stage, primarily managing it, is you take off some of that load of having to do everything. And so that's just an example. And then the other kind of motivation I think I made for teaching teams or course development teams and distributed agency is diversity. So a very good example is that we are creating a course, my department, we have studios, and we're creating video materials to support South African Sign Language. Now the lecturer who came in was an expert in the domain, and originally the idea was kind of doing very sort of small sign language equivalent as they were lecturing, and one of my learning designers who has a particular interest stepped in and said, actually no, that's not an equity perspective. That's not how you should do it. They should be equally kind of represented, and they had to rework the whole kind of multimedia, but knowledge was created in that moment. And now we use that as an exemplar for other things. So I think, for me, I'm talking very practically, I suppose, because sometimes we can have quite sort of high-level ideas of what people should do, and how to use frameworks. But sometimes what I've found is that teams working together on the ground, creating, learning environments and learning experiences for students, in a kind of digitally enabled, blended environment. I think the magic really happens in the process, so that when we've interviewed the lecturers or the academics afterwards, one of them said to me after they had made an online course for 9 or 10 months, it's like, if I knew what it involved, I would never have done it. But it was like being pregnant, but then I got a baby, which was wonderful. So I think it's like holding spaces for people, and to say that there are so many other skills and capacities and ideas and diversity that can come into the teaching space, and that are essentially human, I think, still. And then, of course, we can't avoid AI, and I think that AI agents, whatever we call them in a few years' time, because it probably will be different. At the moment we're sort of saying assistants and bots and all the things that make sense to us, AI tutors, digital twins. I think they will be very much a part of the future university supporting the teaching function. But I think that it's how we can imagine them being integrated to support teachers. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor. Actually, I don't have have a question. I just have a short contribution, and which is based on Professor Khumalo presentation. Thank you very much for your advocacy on digital language. Also, I'm mother tongue advocacy. In fact, in my channel, I teach mathematics in Yoruba. Yoruba is a language spoken by inhabitants of Western African country, in particular Nigeria. So I acknowledge the complexity you made mention when it comes to teaching with mother's tongue. So, namely, for example, if you want to teach mathematics itself is difficult. Only we find one of 10 students who will say they like mathematics. Teaching, in another language, Zulu, for example, might make it more difficult. So likewise, if we teach completely in our mother's tongue, I think we might not be able to compete internationally. And I have an approach which I'm using, which is not about teaching completely in mother's tongue. It is just explaining the concept in our mother's tongue. So that's what I do. I think we can just leverage on that. So we just explain the concept while retaining the international terms in the foreign language. And this one will have a lot of advantages. One is that students will understand the concept better, and then they will be able to compete internationally. So thank you very much.
Thanks to see. Thanks, Prof. And very interesting conversation. I just want to check with you, Prof. Khumalo, and maybe the other panelists too. How the language policy, that says you have to teach in multilingual way. So how practical is that for a lecturer who can understand one language and has students of various languages in their class, aside from using technology as the interface to, like you were saying, we do not have the translator. So I'm trying to understand, if we are not building this technology, how practical is it? Aside from now that AI came in, let us go back. And I know that this language policy has been there before the birth of ChatGPT and Punya. So how were you going to implement that before?
Okay.
Oh,
There's another one.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm waiting.
So just take 4 and then you'll be in the next round.
All right.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to hear some thoughts from the panelists about this challenge of doing work in indigenous language. I think, the thoughts where my mind first went was, why not translate what Black thinkers who are dealing with their experience have already done? And of course, I'm speaking from a humanities perspective with what I'm saying. And I think an example of what I'm talking about is a translation that was recently done of the book The Wretched of the Earth. Is in Bangana, Zomsa. I don't know who exactly it was. It was translated by Mama Kosa Zanaka, and that is, that's one place where what happens is we move from simply speaking at the level of abstraction, about the injunction that we were given by Vusi all those years ago in decolonizing the mind, and getting into very specific projects where funding issues can be discussed and models can be developed in order to ensure. So I'd like to hear some thoughts from the panelists about that. Thank you very much.
Okay, the last question and then we'll go to the next guy.
Thank you. Prof. Khumalo, you seem to have sparked a lot of us. I had my essay prepared here, so I'll just try to rush through the points. happy Biko month, everyone. And I say this in the context of what you were saying, Prof. Khumalo, about your experience being punished for speaking your language. I think this links very well with what we are thinking about in September. That is still because ideas, because all you were saying was, let us affirm African humanity. And one of the things is language. And so I wonder though, Prof, because as you were speaking, you triggered the linguist in me. So I'm an instructional designer by profession, but a linguist by training. So my study was on language policies in Africa in the context of decolonization. Around 2015, 2016, when everyone was in Moscow, I also got the spirit. So I want to get a sense, what's the challenge with language policy implementation in the country? Because when I did my study in 2016, especially looking at the African languages, especially Xitsonga, Xifenda, they were not very developed. And for example, when I work as a language practitioner and I need language resources, it's hard to find it. So, what is the current state of our language policy? But hands out and the different language units I know exist, like how are they doing in terms of progress? I'm more interested in the Xifenda one. Maybe I can help, who knows? But have we considered maybe the case of Afrikaans and how it developed? Because I learned that really it was not a top-down thing per se. The state had its role, but really the community, the people in the community forced the issue of the use of Afrikaans in day-to-day life, in business and everything in politics. So our politicians, could they do more? Maybe speak the language. Maybe I could go to interpret for President Ramaphosa. He speaks my language. But yeah, that's all I'm asking is, could it be maybe we are continuously training language practitioners in this country, the different institutions? Maybe they could help, maybe they could be brought in somehow, consultation or something, through the language units, PANCEL. I'm willing to help, Prof. So at the moment I'm not so clear whether I should really be thinking about instructional design or language policy and linguistics. But these are both things I'm passionate about and believe and interest. Like, my apologies for this.
Thank you so much.
I, for one, forgive you. I think most questions are centered on language because that's exactly who we are. Language humanizes us. We're human beings because we speak. We are because we speak. And when you touch language, you touch issues of humanity. You touch that which is central to us. And we have to really find a solution to how do we connect to that which really, the nexus between what I know that is external to what I am, whose internal processes are actually imbued and brought alive through language. And thinking doesn't happen without language. So again, you need language to process your thoughts. So language really humanizes. In my talk at UCT, I was trying to disabuse the idea that you can actually say language is a tool. The lingua nullius argument that became a fad in Europe and was killed by just one paper from, what's his name? And he did a fantastic job in rebutting that idea that because we are a global village, we have the advantage of English that connects us, and English is this lingua nullius instrument that has no territory, but that belongs to all of us. We know that that is the metaphor that you used earlier.
This is an explainer of the male boba.
More polite. More very polite. But we and because we have excavated some of the instructive programs that brought English to what it is today, we know that there is more to its hegemonic status than just an accident. So language is at the heart of this conversation because it is actually humanity, social cohesion. I mean, if you talk to a language that somebody speaks, or if you tell somebody to speak in their language, there is this confidence that they begin to exist, or the fact that they feel settled, even in the organization of their ideas and the way they present them. I will not talk about my defense, my PhD defense, because I did it in English. I have never been such a wreck in front of people. I failed my PhD if I hadn't had my English on. There is something that just disables you in trying to master and present an argument in a language that is not natural to you. And so bringing multilingualism as articulated in the language policy for higher education institution is trying to bring this confidence back to the classroom. And also to enable these speakers to unlock that which they just present before you tell them anything. Because that's what they present in the classroom. They present that language. Then you can add on that. Instead of prescribing, you just say, keep it outside. I want to bring us a clean slate. I want to pen on your heads, on your minds. That's not what happens in the classroom. So translanguaging is something that you were looking for when you said you were using Yoruba and English in trying to teach mathematical concepts. We're using that because we're trying to bridge the language resource gaps that exist within these languages. There are certain things that you are teaching in mathematics and you get to a concept that Yoruba doesn't have. You close that gap. You translanguage. You bring English and then you complete your delivery. You know. And in South Africa, we've been using that for the longest time, but to come to you. We've been using that for the longest time. We've been translanguaging just to bridge certain and to smoothen certain teaching edges, even from basic education. The problem is it's been unofficial. The problem is we have not developed a theory of that. And the worst part is that we don't have a framework for that delivery. Which brings me to the final point that I want to make. The Teaching and Learning Strategy Group for USAF, which Prof. Msiza sits in, has now requested the chair, the NRF chair for teaching and learning in higher education that sits at Rhodes, to develop a multilingual teaching and learning framework. For the first time, we're going to have a coherent approach to managing the multiplicity of languages in a classroom when they interface with what we have been describing as knowledge. We need that because it's so haphazard, it's so eclectic, there is not a coherent approach to managing multilingual classrooms, multilingual spaces. So hopefully that framework is going to provide something that is going to guide us into the future. The policies have been there. The Constitution, for crying out loud, in section 6 speaks about language. And we have a plethora of policies from government, basic education, higher education, on multilingualism, on the language policy, etc. They are just pious articles of faith. Again, because we don't have, after 30 years, can I call it the spine, to do what Africans did 99 years ago. 100 years they're going to be celebrating next year. They had the guts, the guile, and the drive to say we are going to teach in this language, we're going to provide the resources, and in no time, this language is going to be a language of teaching from kindergarten to university. 30 years of democracy, we achieved a fire pool. I'm not doing political. and EXCOM is broken. So is that what we have achieved as a, and we're still writing. The Use of Official Languages Act in 2012, excellent legislation. Now we have the Language Policy for Higher Education. Now we have the Bala Act. Excellent. But are we going to be piling these articles without anything that follows through? So we are not sure of. In fact, if anything, we have a policy paralysis. And yes, you can assist the president with translation to Chitsama. But for the first time in the language policy framework for higher education institution, the policy brings basic education, brings higher education, brings sports, arts and culture, and PANSAL as key stakeholders in driving multilingualism in the country. And if we were to actually play our part, as we are constitutionally empowered to within these four institutions, we can do something. But again, the framework has not been there, and I'm hoping USAF is going to do something to get that framework out and for our institutions to really start having a good framework to teach in multilingualism. It is not a threat. It is who we are. Monolingualism, I'm going to talk about that tomorrow. Monolingualism is colonialism. Monolingualism is just colonialism. There is no society that is monolingual. Not even one. So I'm hoping that we can embrace multilingualism. And then as good human beings, as smart human beings that we are, make it productive for us. Make it work for us. The fact that we've been running away from it and we are failing means that we need to stop somewhere and embrace it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Another round. We have 3 speakers. I want to remind you.
All the questions.
Okay, let's start with you.
Jet lag right now.
Thank you, Doc. You actually answered my question.
Thank you.
Yes, yeah, because I think we tend to be ambitious, over ambitious regarding this issue of the language policy in South Africa. Yet we're a young country. I mean, 30 years. Even if you look at Zimbabwe, who got independence more than 2-3 decades ago, but Shona is not still incorporated in their curriculum. And to say, well, Afrikaners or English were able to make sure that everything is done in Afrikaans or English, they didn't have complex challenges like we do today. HIV and AIDS, teenage pregnancy, poverty, climate change. So I think we need to embrace the fact that we are facing a lot of challenges, but it's true, we need to have a framework. We need to get going. But to answer my questions, so thank you.
So Langa should just complete that metaphor you started. Plus I went off the rails. So I was trying to make kind of sense of these speakers together. And I thought all of you were, so mine is just a comment, and you could answer the comment if you want to, is problem clarification. And I thought, Langa, yours was about absence, and Sukaina's was about presence, what you're doing right now. And then Punya was hitting the spot between those two spaces. And I was just thinking that perhaps that's the future of the university. We're going to have problems, but we're going to have absences, we're going to have presences, and we're going to have another space in between that still needs to be engaged.
Any more hints?
Okay, I wanted to caution. You see, bringing African languages in higher education or in any training space does not mean dumbing down science or knowledge, or it doesn't mean that. Which is why it is important to resource these languages adequately. And it means a whole gamut of corpora, of terminology, of systems and tools, so that their efficacies are improved and they can function fully in all knowledge spaces, from mundane to the most complex. So we must not say, no, because you speak ISoTL, come and write an examination in ISoTL, because it will make it easy for you to pass. Okay, if it makes it easy, that's a bonus, because of course they have mother tongue competence. But it is not easy because they have it easy. We dumb it down to, no. The idea is not to, we had a very serious argument at NWU when they said, no, we're not going to encourage the teaching of accounting in in Afrikaans because it makes it easy for them to pass. Hello? Hello? Exactly. I want to really program that point. We are not bringing multilingualism so that we can have the poor cousins in a workplace of those that are trained in ISoTL and have a dumbed down qualification, and those that are trained in any other language, they have an excellent qualification. These languages must be resourced adequately for them to be used for teaching and learning, so that we can have qualified graduates that have the competencies that the program requires. The rest of the questions, I am very happy to defer to my colleagues.
I don't know who asked this question about language and digitality. I think it was someone in the back there, right? So, I think that is a huge issue, and I think it is data colonization. I gave the example in my talk about how almost all the data that's there has been trained on Western industry and blah, 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 blah. I have done translations, when you can go and try it yourself, when I've done translations into Spanish and French and Portuguese, quite excellent on pretty academic texts. When I try to do it with Hindi or Bengali or Mandarin, not as good. For the simple reason, and so now if we come to African languages, it is going to be infinitely worse because there is that corpus of data to train it is just not there. So I don't speak Bengali, so I did this with a graduate student of mine, and she said, Punya, the language that it's using is very old style Bengali. Guess why that is? Because those older texts are the ones which have been digitized and in museums, which these OpenAI and these companies store, quote unquote, let's be very clear. This is ripping off the content of other people. Let's not forget that piece. But they have less stuff that they could steal. So you see the same inequities which exist will continue because of that reason. And I think it's really, really important. So which is why I think the point you're making that those stories that are there, those narratives that are there, they need to be recorded and digitized. Because if you don't have that data, you cannot train these language models on adequate amounts of data. And one thing that these language models is very clear, it's only when you reach a certain scale of petabytes and petabytes of data that they actually start getting these superpowers. Frankly, that's the only difference between OpenAI 2.0 versus 3 versus 3.5 is the amount that it's been trained on, right? So that's, I think, incredibly important. there's a flip side to it as well, which is that if we do manage to do it, this may be one way of reclaiming languages. So because if I can only speak Korea and you can only speak, give me a language. Zulu, right? If we get it right, I could be communicating with you through the computer, you would be speaking Zulu, I would be speaking Korea, and we would have a conversation. That's what AI offers. That's amazing as a possible future. Is it one that I think will happen? I'll be absolutely honest, I'm absolutely pessimistic about it. Because as a species, we have not shown much intentionality, application of resources at a global level. We couldn't even get together for a pandemic. We couldn't figure out that we have to wear a damn mask. Okay, I mean, that's where the pessimist in me comes in. But can this technology, does it have the potential to do it? It absolutely does. Which is what makes it magical and in some ways tragic that we most probably will miss the boat because of that. Let's see. Your question about how can we make education relevant, and I could balance that with this question of innovation and rigor. Who cares about innovation? I really don't care about innovation. I don't. What I care about is if I'm an educator, if I'm a language person, is the student, is the learner, is the society, is the citizenship? And the question I have to ask myself, am I doing the best by that person? Are our policies doing the best by the population? And, you know, if we are absolutely honest with each other, with ourselves, if we look in the mirror, we are not. So we don't have a choice, but try something else, because what we have been doing has not been the best that we can do. So innovation to me comes from rigor. You see, it's not it's a wrong dichotomy, it's a false dichotomy to say rigor and innovation go against each other. If innovation is driven by the right values, that is the rigor. The rigor comes from there. The rigor doesn't come from somebody dropping it on me and saying a p-value of so much is rigor. Right? Rigor comes from a care for the task that we have been given and to do better at it. So that's why I worry less about plagiarism. I mean, if this thing is going to be on every phone and so on, guess what? Educators will figure it out. We'll figure out ways of evaluating student learning that will respect that. It's fun, right? So, and the final comment, I think, Naina's your comment. What it reminded me of was there's this famous saying by Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first Prime Minister, where he's talking about India's future. He says that our feet should be firmly in the past. And what he means by that is not just all the good things in the past, but the bad things in the past. There's all mixed up there. Our eyes should be firmly on that future, and our body should be here now. And I think that this family here, in some ways, is sort of reflecting that. You know what I mean? And what I'm trying to get at is that I don't see people talk about this technology as being sort of socially, emotionally destructive in ways that we have seen social media just scrape the surface of. That we can be manipulated by this technology in ways by bad actors that will take advantage of existing schisms in our society to make things worse. I don't hear enough people yell that from the rooftops, so I have made it my mission to keep saying this over and over again. And and that's the one which is looking to the future, but not with rose-tinted glasses, being absolutely cognizant of the past that we have failed to sometimes recognize, of the present and the challenges we face today.
Thanks. So, just in response to that, how to make education relevant, one sort of maybe pedestrian response is we need to change our curriculum to adapt to AI and so on. And I think we will do that. We will be forced to from different forces, whether it's industry or within ourselves, or because what we teach cannot be tenable. But I think that going back to what Punya was saying around what does it mean now to be human and a person and a citizen when faced with non-human actors and things that feel human, but we know they're not, but we're still going to treat them as. And I agree with you. I think that there's a human kind of imperative. You know, it's not only AI. You know, we talk to our pets. And I should see how I talk to my cats. You know, nobody ever see me do that. Like we want a relational bond with things that feel like us. That are we animate inanimate things. There's some sort of human need, and I can see we're doing that with our AI colleagues, tutors, friends, whatever metaphors we're using. And then there's scarier things like replica, for example, for intimate relationships and so on. So, and then I was like having a thought experiment with myself, and maybe I can ask the question is, are we better off because AI does hallucinate? Show of hands. I was thinking, what if it did not hallucinate? What if it gave you the perfect answer and it was right? I know technically you can't understand that. Where would we be then? At least with what we've got, we have that hope, like we can tell where it's, we can have that engagement around that. So I'm actually quite grateful for hallucinations. Just flipping the switch, right? And that's because we have created AI. It's come from us. It's part of a long evolution. Called it AI, could have been called something else, sure, cybernetic, or anything else. But we have created it. It is part, it's part of the fabric of where we're going as humans. This need to create thinking machines, teaching machines. There's a long history, even before 1956 in the Dartmouth Conference. There's been a long history of trying to mimic the human, the brain, the embodiedness of it. So I don't think we have answers, but I just think we have a very exciting and exciting good and exciting bad journey together now that this has landed in a very practical way from November 2023.
Thank you so much.